Hello, welcome back, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Mindful Mezzo podcast. My name is Sabatina Morrow, and I am so excited you are here. I want to first say Happy New Year, and I am so excited that if you're joining us for the first time in the new year, that we get to go on a whole year of adventures together in mindfulness, self-acceptance, and understanding the arts as an artist, and understanding the self. There's so much we can talk about. I first wanted to open this episode with a disclaimer that this podcast is not intended for any sort of medical use. It is not intended to replace a doctor or a medication. I do strongly encourage that if you feel that you could benefit from a doctor or medication, to go and speak to someone. This podcast is purely from one artist to another on how to battle daily hurdles and how to incorporate mindfulness and self-love into what we do as artists and performers and overall as people. Today I want to discuss the concept of gray matter as artists. Recently, and I know you'll maybe find this funny, recently I watched the movie Black Swan for the first time. And having never seen it before, I was pretty struck by its relevance in today's world. I know it's not a recent movie, but it has really withstood the test of time from an artist's perspective. I did do some online digging and read some articles to get some more information, and I did see that different sources say it's a commentary on self-image, a thirst for wanting perfection, an account of illness and mental illness. But what really stuck out to me was how well they captured the feeling of stepping out of the body or viewing yourself from outside yourself with their camera work. As an artist and as a person who's experienced different anxieties, there's often this sense of stepping outside of the self that happens when we're stressed. It happens a lot when we perform, where we are almost watching ourselves perform, which can be all sorts of haunting and all sorts of uncomfortable. And to see it on a screen really struck me, and hence now I'm talking about it online. As a performer who's had to deal with this kind of thing a lot, it was very jarring in a way that had really nothing to do with the plot. And as you'll see, this is not a movie review, but mostly to do with the senses that it engaged and triggered with its cinematography in my own experience, my own body, my own brain. This got me thinking about something that I think and talk about quite often, which is how we as performers often feel we are either good or bad, that we may only exist in black or white versions of ourselves, and how we very rarely explore the gray area between our best self and our worst self, or between the polished, filtered self and our raw, unpolished self. Now, I will say right off the bat, this is not to say that you have a good self and a bad self. If that was the thought that came to your mind, then I do think this is the episode for you, because we are not here to establish that there is bad in us. So right away, just shake it out of your brain that there's a bad version of you out there, because that is untrue. There is a filtered version of you. There is a presence that we often portray, and then there's who we really are. We can, call that, it's like a game of checkers. It's black or white. It's red or black or whatever version of a board game that comes to mind, but there's no in-between color. And today we're here to talk about that in-between. This idea of black and white, or polished and unpolished, or filtered and unfiltered, is a huge conversation in, of course, the movie Black Swan, but also exists quite often in the performance industry and the artistic industry. And it's spooky to see it addressed out in the real world in a way that the non-performer can understand. It feels almost like this director opened up a private diary and pulled out thoughts I never wanted anyone to see. And so I thought, of course, let's put it in a podcast and bring it out to the forefront of my conversations for this week. As artists, we often only see ourselves as good and bad. The self who gets things and the self who doesn't. I often see posts and have conversations with colleagues that can be so self-demeaning. Times when a colleague doesn't get a part or win a competition and feels as though their worst self was showing, rather than their whole self that just didn't happen to get what they set out for that day. Conversations in this matter often has something to do with not trying hard enough and just needing to give ourselves a stern talking to before we let our best self back out on the field. We can be so quick to say, well, that wasn't me up there. It was all of my bad parts on parade, when that just may not be the truth. So, how do we handle accepting and understanding that even our best self can make mistakes or not get us exactly what we wanted? I think that we can start by understanding that as a whole human, it is okay for us to possess both things that can get us to the finish line and things that can hold us back. It is okay for us to possess things that can get us to the finish line while also possessing things that can hold us back. This is where the idea of gray matter comes in. The conversation can turn from I'm black or white to I'm black and white. And when we mix those two together, we get gray. So I'm not good or bad. I'm not polished or unpolished. I'm both refined and raw. And that's where that gray matter comes in. What on earth is gray matter? I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but for the sake of the episode, I'm just going to give you some symbolism for some otherwise hefty thoughts and ideas. Let's start by looking at some ways that we can create this gray space in our own artistic lives. Understanding that the you are presenting as an artist is your whole self is the first step. Don't blame the bad parts of yourself for not getting something. Blame is often very negative, and it can cause you to internally divide yourself between good and bad, when often what you need are all those parts of yourself to get to where you need to go. The idea of checking your baggage at the door before you create your art is not one that I love. Bring your baggage. Our experiences, good, bad, and gray, make us who we are, within reason, as in, if it's safe and productive to do so, it may actually benefit you greatly to bring some of your harder experiences with you as you create. Your life has shaped you into a well-rounded person. If you leave the edges at home to fit a specific shape, you are not bringing your whole self to create. And you are your whole self. So don't hold yourself back by leaving any parts of you behind. If I'm auditioning for something that is square, and I show up that day as a triangle, because that's just who I am, I'm not going to fit into that square. But I can chop off some sides and turn myself into a square, but then I'd be leaving out the most beautiful angles and the most beautiful diagonal lines that I possess, all to fit a square. And chances are trying to lob off those sides of me will actually hold me back, because the people that I'm presenting to, that I am auditioning for, that I am interviewing with, are going to miss out on some of the best parts of me that I've decided are not worthy, which is just so far from the truth, because I can be gray instead of just black or white. Another idea that I think ties into this mindset, this journey, is coming to peace with having your experiences. We can't change our past, so how can we come to terms with it? There are all sorts of ways to come to terms with your past. This is something that will differ from person to person. And of course, I can give advice here. We can have a conversation. You can ask questions. But for the purpose of this discussion, I want you to find your own personal ways to come to terms with past experiences, things that may have been positive or negative that have shaped you, that are maybe harder to process in the current day, and find your own personal ways to make peace with those. Often this includes finding that peace in those not so perfect parts of yourself. Maybe we made a mistake once and it means that, every other time we pick up music, we pronounce a word wrong. That's okay. If you know that happens, try again. Pick it up, start over. There's no harm in starting over. There's no harm in making mistakes, but come to peace with the fact that one time you said this word wrong and now you have to work a little harder just to not. That's one example, but overall, give yourself space and find peace in the past. An idea that often weighs heavily on my mind is, the idea of perfection. I want to poke the bear a bit and say that perfection is a projection. We are not perfect. To strive for perfection is imbalanced. We can instead strive to improve, strive to learn, strive to be personally successful in whatever way success is defined for you. This year, as we embark on a whole new journey, I would love to challenge you to let go of the need to be all good or the concern about being all bad, and instead find your peace in the gray in between. There can be a lot of happiness and peace in the gray areas of mostly good and not too bad. If you struggle finding that in between, give yourself lots of space and make yourself a written list. I know this is not the first time I've harped on written lists, but I do think that writing things down can be incredibly helpful. For example, I know I cannot be 100% on all of the time, but I want to strive today, this year, this interview, etc., to bring 95% of my best work. And I am willing to give myself peace if I have 5% human error. You can, of course, adjust those made-up percentages to whatever numbers you need to in order to be gentle with yourself, give yourself space, and avoid giving yourself this idea that you have to rid any flaws that you may possess. Because remember, human beings by nature are flawed. We'll never do the same thing twice. So it's pretty unrealistic to expect yourself to yield robot-like results. I once had the honor of working with a fabulous artist, coach, musician, and just wonderful mentor in person that was very comfortable with the idea of that gray space. They did not expect the singers in the room with them to be perfect all of the time, or pretty much ever. When I would walk into a rehearsal with this person, they would make sure that I knew that I was in a comfortable space and that I was allowed to make mistakes, which is very rare. And I do feel very fortunate to have had an experience where I was welcomed to make mistakes and laugh about the silly ones and learn from the harder mistakes. And something invaluable that I learned while working with this person was that you will never be 100% twice for the same performance. And of course, that is up for debate, but hear me out. You will never be 100% twice for the same performance because there are factors daily that will change your outcome for anything, but especially for a high stakes performance or artistic expression or even just a work day. You might wake up with a cold. You might get some bad news and be sad. You might get some good news and be overwhelmed. You might just wake up on the wrong side of the bed and not feel 100% that day. But to show up to a performance or any sort of interview or higher stakes situation and demand 100% of yourself when you are not feeling 100% that day is so unkind to yourself. I think that we want perfection so badly. We say that if you can't be perfect, you're not trying hard enough, that you have to wake up and choose perfection. And that if you're not waking up and choosing perfection, you're just not trying. You just don't want it. And we've covered that in other episodes past, but do you hear how that sounds? You put your all into something and you show up at 98% for a performance, and all you can say to yourself is, if I just had that other 2%, maybe that just means I don't want it enough. Maybe that 2% is the difference between me and a celebrity. No. Celebrities are celebrities. People who, quote unquote, make it may have had different circumstances than you. So I wouldn't just wager that because you had a cold, they're going to get something over you, because every person who's above us and below us has been sick, has had bad days, has forgotten to practice, has shown up late to a rehearsal. And sometimes what you see may be their 95% or their 80%. But because they're someone else, we're just going to assume they're at 100% all the time. So this was a long-winded way to say, this wonderful mentor that I worked with said, promise yourself that you'll try to be at 90 to 95% for every performance that you do, for every, interview you walk into, for every time you have to show off. Promise yourself that you'll try to be at 90 to 95%, because without fail, the human body does wild things and the brain does wild things. And we often find that even on our best days, we can knock 1 or 2% off of our perfection just because we're human. So if you can make sure that you are showing up with a really solid 95%, perfection becomes obsolete. If you are reliable at your 90 to 95%, perfection is not necessary. You are not a robot. You are not artificially intelligent. You are not responsible for making up for a lack of perfection that you feel you possess, or a perfection that you don't possess. You are not responsible for making up for some made up lack of perfection. We can be black or white. We can be one or the other. We can be yes or no, good or bad, polished or unpolished. But when we do that, we are only one of those things. So going into this new year and going into this journey that we're on, I want to encourage you to embrace the good and bad, the yes and no, the polished and the unpolished, the filtered and the raw. And trust that your past experiences and your future endeavors are laid out for you in a way that will allow you to use all of those wonderful parts of yourself. Mix the black and the white. Make yourself gray. It has to sometimes be a very conscious choice and a waking decision to show up gray today. But I'll do it if you will. And then I know that the next time I step into a room where I am at a higher stake situation, in a performance, in an audition, in an interview, I'm going to try very hard to not compare myself to some unrealistically perfect version of myself. Because if that version were real, I probably wouldn't be a human. I'd probably be artificially intelligent or have a computer for a brain, or however that works. But I'm a human. I will make mistakes. I will sing the wrong words. I might sneeze in the middle of a choir performance. We've all been there. But that does not mean that I'm not good, that I'm not worthy of something. And it doesn't mean that I am making mistakes in, choosing a career. It just means that I'm a little gray. And I would invite you that as we move into this year, as I've said, to be gray, to find peace in the experiences that got us here, to find happiness in the in-between, and to learn from all of our good and bad. As we close this episode, I just want to remind you that you are where you need to be. I want to remind you that just because someone else is in a different place than you does not mean you are any less than great. It does not mean you are any less than anyone else. And as we move into the new year, I want to challenge you not only in finding peace and happiness in the gray, but I want to challenge you to stop comparing yourself to those around you. Comparing ourselves to others is like window shopping. We want what's in the window, but we won't go into the store and get it. Probably because that store just wasn't made for us. Might not be our style. You don't have to put on the shoe that doesn't fit. I know I've said this before. Find the shoes that fit. Find the things that are tangible and within reach and take them. Make them your own. Incorporate them into your gray space. And ultimately, find peace in your journey. I want to invite you to breathe in 5s with me. If you don't know what that is, we're going to breathe in for 5, hold for 5, out for 5, hold for 5. So if you are in a place that is safe to do so, if you are not operating any heavy machinery or driving any cars or doing anything that this would get in the way of, I would invite you to breathe in 5s with me. So I'm going to count in and breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Mindful Mezzo podcast. I know today was a wild journey that started in the cinematic universe and ended in, so many analogies. But I appreciate you being on this journey with me, and it's an honor to be on the journey with you. Please let me know if you are going to implement anything you've learned in this episode in the new year. I'm excited for you if you are, and I'm excited for you either way. I wish you lots of peace and happiness in finding your gray matter, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye.